Welcome to episode 286 of the Manager Track podcast. Today we're going to talk about the difference between being nice and being kind and why distinguishing the two is really, really important if you want to have a high-performing, accountable team. My guest for this conversation is Andrea Wanerstrand. Andrea is a seasoned leadership strategist, executive coach, and the founder of A3 Culture Lab. She has over 25 years of experience inside global giants such as Microsoft, Meta, T-Mobile, and Hitachi. Andrea has designed programs that have impacted leaders from more than 100 countries. She blends neuroscience, behavioral strategy, and sharp business insight to drive powerful cultural change. Plus, a quick fun fact, speaking about the business insight, she is turning a pig farm into a lavender farm on an island outside of Seattle. So in this conversation with Andrea, we unpack the difference between being nice and being kind as a leader. Andrea explains why niceness often serves our own need to be liked, while kindness requires courage, honesty, and that service to others. We explore how kind leaders build trust through direct feedback and how her A3 framework helps teams perform and grow without the manager being a bottleneck. So with that said, let's dive in and welcome Andrea to the show. Here are the two questions this podcast answers. One, how do you successfully transition into your first official leadership role? And two, how do you keep climbing that leadership ladder and continuously get promoted, although the competition and the expectations get bigger? This show, the Manager Track podcast, will provide the answers. I'm your host, Ramona Shaw. I'm on a mission to create workplaces where work is seen as a source of contribution, connection, and personal fulfillment. And this transition starts with developing a new generation of leaders who know how to lead so everyone wins and grows. In the show, you'll learn how to think, communicate, and act as a confident and competent leader you know you can be. Okay, Andrea, welcome to the Manager Track podcast. I'm excited to have you on as a guest today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Ramona.
So one of the things that stood out to me about your work was your intentional focus on calling out when are we being too nice and when does that get in the way, and sort of how we overall think about niceness in the workplace. And you differentiate between being nice and being kind. To get the conversation started, I'd love for us to start right there. Can you share a bit more about what intrigued you to pick up this topic and investigate and talk about it? And then what is the definition for being nice and how do you define being kind, or what's the difference between the two?
Sure. So my company's name is A3 Culture Lab, and the A3 stands for authenticity, accountability, and autonomy. And they are the three levers that I see in high-performing teams across the globe, and there's a synergy. And this concept of nice versus kind came out as I was looking at blockers for people to show up authentically. And I don't mean oversharing in the workplace when I say authentic. There's a definition to that as well. But it's a form of consistency and people know what to expect. It has a balanced emotional intelligence with emotional awareness in there. And what I found is that my clients that were being nice is generally when it's about us. We want to be perceived some way. We want to be liked. We want to be accepted. We want people to, feel good all the time. Not that we want to make them feel bad when we're being kind, but kind is a shift where we are looking at the other individual and showing up for them in the way that they need us to show up, versus our own personal agenda of being liked. So nice is often avoiding saying the hard thing, whereas kindness does it in a way that's constructive, fosters growth, addresses a challenge, and is in benefit and service to those around us and holds us accountable for what our accountabilities are. A nice manager is not giving the constructive feedback where there's opportunities. And a kind manager, as an example, is the person that steps in and offers to help, offers to help them see things from a different way, is pushing things forward for the team, and they have the courage to step in. And it's not about being disliked, it's about being respected with integrity of saying the hard thing in a kind manner that actually moves people forward. So the prime differential is nice. When we're being nice, it's generally our own agenda and things that we're trying to show up for and be perceived as. And kind is when we are showing up as our authentic self in service to others to move things forward.
Can you share a example of how either with a team or an individual leader you help them from being nice to being kind? Because when I think about the conversations I have with leaders who are wired from often from a young age on to operate with niceness and to make sure that people around them always feel good and they really care about the relationship. And there is a lot that goes into that transition from being nice to being kind. Can you shed some more light on that journey?
Yeah, the kind leader shares and supports the relationship going forward rather than just the moment that they're in. And so I've worked with a leader that had inherited a team and they were really challenged because they knew and they were empathetic that there'd been a reorg, they inherited this team, and they really just wanted to be liked. But they also knew they had to upskill some individuals on the team. And rather than giving some direct constructive feedback based on patterns that they've witnessed in basing it in fact and known truths, they would avoid the conversation. They'd start taking away perhaps responsibilities because, it's not their best thing. Maybe I just won't give it to them. And so they actually inadvertently started diminishing these individuals who still had great potential, still had great opportunity. It was just a time this organization need to level up because they wouldn't step in and say, "You're really great at these 4 things, but this 5th thing is this area of opportunity that in order for us to go from here to there, we're gonna need a different way of going forward, and here's the observations that I have, and here's how it's going to go." That's what a kind conversation would be, but this nice leader just would avoid it or delegate it to somebody else, and it made them feel really good because 'cause they're not having to give the hard conversation of, "This is not your best level of performance in this area, and this is the area of opportunity, and the team needs this for you." That's the kind
Mhm.
conversation, and they thought they were being nice by not giving them feedback that they may not wanna hear, and people can see through that, right? It's a form of a mask that we're wearing. They're not saying the unsaid thing, and people start not believing in what you say in the said things. So what that leads up to is this lack of trust, this lack of really the accountability and the belonging. And so when the leader was able to like step in and get their own needs and ego out of the conversation and say the hard thing, that individual actually had some awareness. Yeah, I'm not really comfortable in that. That's out of my comfort zone. And felt
Mhm.
supported rather than criticized. So we often think of feedback is about, could be bringing somebody down. But instead, I like to proposition that it's lifting others up. You see potential in them, you see an opportunity, and you're helping them get there in a way that supports and meets them where they're at. It's not doing it for them, but it's supporting them. And if you avoid it, you're actually being not nice. You're not being kind, but you are making everybody feel good in that moment. But tomorrow, that elephant is still going to be in the room and it's still going to be
Mhm.
awkward and people are going to feel diminished.
And one of those questions that I think really hits home is when we think about when was a time where I did something I was unaware that I was doing it, or that I wasn't good at, and no one told me. And I later received feedback and wished I had gotten that feedback
way earlier, or I got some kind of feedback, but it wasn't direct enough. And I wish someone would have just pulled me aside and said, "You got spinach in your teeth."
Yeah,
Metaphorically speaking, but someone would have said, like, when you do this, it creates that kind of response, or you might be perceived that way. And we wish someone would have said that. Most of us have an example that we can think of over the last few years or even months where that was the case and that happened. And we wanted someone to say that for us, and we would have considered that the kind thing to do.
absolutely. See, the kind leader doesn't care less. I would argue that they care more. They care more enough to put themselves out of their own comfort zone where nice lives, when we're all just nice and we're fine, especially in North America. Yeah, somebody, how you're doing today? Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm doing great.
Mhm,
And then there's actually a whole bunch of reality around that that may or may not be true. But it's the nice to
mhm,
say, it's the expected response. So when we can, I would dare say, stop being selfish in our niceness and be truly kind, be truly empathetic, and hold other people up to that autonomy and accountability, they do appreciate it more. They're like, "Thank you for telling me I have spinach in my teeth," right?
mhm.
I could say and be doing everything else, but I've got this thing that's sticking out and it's distracting from how I can achieve some results. And kind
Mhm.
enough to help me with that rather than bring me down.
Now, to make this a bit more practical, I think many of us would say intellectually, I totally understand. But then in the moment, when I notice I need to step in and give this feedback and I have the best intentions, I set up a one on one conversation or I have this feedback conversation, I go into it. And as I am talking, I notice how I'm starting to sugarcoat, or I would add things such as, you're doing great. It's everything's awesome. It's just this one little thing, right, that we have to change. When in fact, I intended to go in and say, look, overall, your performance is on the right track, but we have like this gap in front of us that we still need to close. And so the things that I say are then not what I really think and what I intended to say. How do you get a company or a team or leaders to actually transition? What are some of the specific exercises that you might do with clients, specific principles or norms that you set in place that the listener now, someone who hears that and is like, yeah, that's totally me, has some ideas on what to do after they finish this podcast?
Absolutely. And it starts with each individual leader and colleague. This works also in giving feedback, across the matrix of an organization and in any interaction that we're having. And the number one thing I have my clients do is before that interaction, especially if it's on the calendar and you know that you're going to step into this versus free form. Sometimes it's easier to start when it's on the calendar, but you take a few moments before the interaction and you pause and you set an intention. How do I want them to feel when they leave the meeting? And that could look like I want them to feel supported. I want them to see the opportunity and be excited or motivated to grow. I want them to know that, this is progress, not perfection, and that I'm moving them forward. I don't want them to feel criticized or belittled or walk away without awareness. So if I set the intention in like 30 seconds of how I want them to feel, because they're going to remember how you made them feel before they remember what you said in that interaction. You take a breath in and say, am I prepared to do that? What are my blockers? What am I nervous about? And then you got to shake it off and step into that fear so that you can build your own confidence and show up for them. That's the best thing that you can do is just take those few moments before your interaction and check in with yourself. So again, set the intention, check in with yourself as to how you're feeling about it. What's your blockers? keep that in check, but step into it and be brave. And then I also add in afterwards, reflect. Did I show up the way I intended? Did I sugarcoat it? One of my least favorite methods out there is the sandwich method, where you say something nice and then you give them the critique and then you give them something nice again at the end. People do a lot of sugarcoating on the outsides of that sandwich, and then the not nice stuff is stuck in the center, and people don't know what to do with that. So be there and make them feel supported. And how would you like to be supported? What does that sound like to you? How do they receive things? Get curious about the other individual. And eventually you'll do that in the flow of work. You won't have to set it up as a meeting on your calendar. But it takes practice, and it takes knowing that you need to get out of your comfort zone where nice lives in order to stop sugarcoating.
Now, when you said that you start with thinking about how you want them to feel, is there ever a case where it would make sense to say, I actually want them to feel like a little bit of the sting? Because when I look at when did I grow the most and what really created behavioral change, it was often, not exclusively, but it was often because I heard some feedback that hit hard for a moment. And I was like, oh, wow, what? Right. And I had to take a break and pause and really reflect. But I didn't particularly feel good. I probably felt supported, that someone really cared and someone really wanted me to change and wasn't invested in my success. But I personally probably felt a little bit criticized at the end of that, or a whole lot criticized. But it led to progress. Is there ever a moment when we'd say, you know what? It's okay if this hurts for a moment, because that kind of hurt is the catalyst to growth. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, it will be uncomfortable. When I say, how do you want to make them feel? And if the nice part of you is like, I want them to feel good, well, you're going to tell them something that's not going to make anybody feel good.
Mhm.
So you want to use your words, make them feel supported. Yet, so when that uncomfortable truth comes forward that you're going to be brave enough to share with them, you're offering a support path forward. They might need to leave that conversation and contemplate and say, okay, what does this feedback mean for me and what do I want to do about it? Give them that space. But the kind person is cognizant about how the other person feels, but they also know it's going to be awkward, it's going to be uncomfortable, and they're willing to go and dance in that moment with that individual because they believe in them. They want to be there for them. They want to be there for the team, and it's what the organization needs. It's what the team needs. It's what that individual needs to get to that next level. So
Mhm.
if you want them to feel like they've like, "Oh, this is great news," even though you've told me I have to, like, course correct 50% of what I do in life, that's just not reality. The reality is it's going to be uncomfortable. But if we don't share that with someone and we've seen it, especially if we are accountable for their performance as their people manager, then we're not doing our job and we're not giving them the opportunity to step into the growth that they're capable of. People say,
Mhm.
well, what if they're not capable of it? Well, that's another hard truth that needs to be shared. And you have to ask them if they're willing to step it up and offering that support and what is at your disposal. It's not doing it for them. They have to take accountability and action on the feedback that you're giving them. And if they do
Mhm.
or don't, that's their choice, but you've at least opened the choice for them.
I want to talk a little bit more about what you shared around accountability. But before we get there, one more question. I can imagine that someone listening to this will say, hey, my problem is actually not that I don't have the courage to be kind and to call out what needs to be called out and address the elephant in the room. My problem is that people that I'm working with, especially younger generations, and I'm calling this out because this is often what I hear, they'll say they are not willing to hear the feedback. They I will get reprimanded if I am being kind and direct, because then it's going to lead to someone complaining to HR about what I said, or it turns into this whole downward spiral because I was being too direct, too fast, in a way that I think is totally normal and acceptable, but to people from different backgrounds, to different cultures, or people who have a different expectation in the workplace, to them that just doesn't seem the same way. What do you suggest or advise for leaders in such a situation?
So if your style is to be blunt and direct, you're not taking into consideration the people that are receiving the information. Do they need to process data? Are they visual thinkers? What is the communication style, regardless of generation or career level, of the individual that you're communicating to? So, emotional intelligence has numerous layers. The first layer being I understand my emotions and perspectives and I can regulate it. The second is I understand other people's emotions and perspectives. And then the third is I understand other people's emotions and perspectives and I adjust my behavior in accordance to support and meet them where they need. What I find with folks that are like, well, I give them the feedback and then their HR is complaining, they are, yes, being direct, but they're not doing it in a way that can be received by the individual. So, stylistically, are you flexing as an individual that you're speaking so that they understand in a way that's actionable for them, that takes them forward rather than causes them to go into panic? When we are in fight or flight and feeling threatened, you're not going to get the results, right? It's it's a harsh aspect, and that's not kind either. It's if you know somebody that needs to process, you give them examples, you've watched patterns, you've observed, and you can put it in context. And you get curious about what's your perspective. I'm sharing this feedback and these observations. What else is going on here? You've got to get curious, because if you just come in and say, these are my observations, this is what you need to change, and you don't engage them, you're doing command and control. You're dictating the choices for the individual, and they're not going to be accountable for it. They're not going to embrace it because they're not part of the process. So you have to engage them and understand what their perspective is, because what you tell them is not always what they hear. And unless they've told you point blank what they think their challenge is, and you've explored that with them, because often the first thing we say is not really the hardest truth that we're facing. It's like the top easiest one to share, but it might be, I don't feel confident. Whereas folks will say, well, I have a hard time working with that team. Well, I don't feel confident because they're subject matter experts in that, and I have to go in and influence them. Well, it's all about confidence at the heart of it. So if
Mhm.
you're telling the hard truth without any contextualization and curiosity, you got to remember it's your truth. It's your perspective, it's your insights, but if you haven't taken into consideration their perspective, you're not going to move the dial. How are they thinking about themselves? Do they think they're really awesome at this? Well, you're going to have to burst that bubble, but do it in a way that makes them want to get awesome at it, not burst the bubble.
I think what you clearly highlight is this is all about flexing the style, whether you like it, right? Whether you agree with it or not. That's really besides the point. Because if you're in a working relationship with someone who sees it different, has a different preference, and a different style would land with them versus what you're used to or what lands with you when someone gives you feedback. And if you think that is the right way and the only way, that's going to diminish your own impact and influence. And so ultimately, it's all about recognizing whatever I think is not relevant. It's all about how do I make sure that it lands given that person where that person is at and what they're expecting.
Yes, and I would add in that you're validating that you're being heard. That sounds like,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on this? What are some of your concerns about what I'm sharing with you? How would you envision improving in this area or moving the dial in this area? Engaging them in it. And this is whether it's a growth opportunity or that you're giving the hard feedback on, or persuading somebody about, engaging more on a project, or just even trying to understand the status of something that's going on that you're concerned about or that you're curious about. When you engage somebody else that you want to be accountable for something versus just telling them how it is or what they need to do, and you validate whether they're comprehending that through questions and like, how will we know we're moving the dial here and getting their perspective? You've simply told them it hasn't landed. Landing is in that validation.
Let's talk about the 3 A's that you mentioned earlier that make up sort of the core framework of the work that you do with leaders. Can you elaborate on the 3 A's a little bit more?
Absolutely. In an A3 culture, it really is about teams that are based in authentic presence, consistency, aligned values. So, authenticity is the first one. I can talk about how you get authentic in a second. Autonomy is this idea of scaling and being owner of your own work, if you will, which then leads into accountability. Because when you own your own work, and own does not mean that you have every decision and that you've gone in as a manager and just handed it over to the team and abandoned it. But when you have employees that own their work, they are more accountable to their work. So let's break that down. Authentic leadership is really showing up in a consistent presence that's aligned with the values. People know what to expect, whether they're bringing you good news or bad news. And I don't mean they know what to expect where like it's the 1990s movie where like folks go running and pretending they're working when they know the boss is coming in. I mean, they know that you're going to be open to hearing what the situation is and that you're going to be able to process things through in an emotionally regulated manner. You're still going to hold people accountable. There's still a consequence for it, but you have this consistency about you that does not really make people uncomfortable, and you're able to build trust. Authentic leaders build trust. So the whole fake it till you make it, you're wearing a mask and that mask will fail. And when you fail, because you will fail at some point, it's progress over perfection. So authenticity and showing up with consistency in order for you then to create autonomy, which means you're leading through others. So you need to let go of the execution that maybe you did as an individual contributor. As a people manager, you're getting work done through others. And you hold them accountable by collaborating with them, getting them part of the process for how things are going to be done. And it might not be the exact way you do it. That's part of that letting go and the autonomy, but they might actually have a better way to do it. And they create that ownership through accountability. It's an infinity loop, if you will, that you get people then who are more authentic. They're showing up in an honest and true nature. You have trust across the team. And again, this is not oversharing and it's not like over explaining everything that's going on. It's just a consistency in how you show up in the work environment so that people know what to expect and for others to be able to collaborate with you in a proactive way. And so the A3 culture is one that really sparks growth because you don't have the stress and tensions of the lack of the things that are unsaid, the elephants in the room, the politics that are going back and forth, because it is a collaborative environment in that infinity loop.
One of the things we talk about here on the podcast every so often is this difference between vertical leadership, how we traditionally look at leadership to I manage you and so I tell you kind of way, to more of a horizontal leadership culture where we all see each other as equals. Now, not equal job responsibility, not equal decision authority, but equal in the sense that we're all humans and we all see each other as individuals coming to the workplace with the need to contribute, with the need to have not just a need, but also bringing in their unique perspective. And we want to give them a voice, obviously, and we all see each other as equal on that level. That then completely changes how we engage with each other. And in your three culture, I recognize as you're talking about this and as I was reading about it, how much of that mindset is interwoven and how practical you make it to say, yeah, we all want to have autonomy. We all want to have our own, strength and values be seen and be able to contribute. We all want to have a work environment where we feel respected for who we are and what we bring to the table.
Absolutely. And we are equal in that we are all humans. We all have agency. We all have our own aspirations. And it's creating clarity as a leader in what the accountabilities are, and setting expectation. I will have, leaders tell me, well, I've told them they're empowered, they're autonomous. And I go, yeah, but do they still have to check with you before they go to the next step? Well, yeah, I need to know what's going on. Well, yeah, then they're not empowered. They're not autonomous. Well, how do I know what they're going to be doing? I go, well, you ask them, right? You say, what's the plan? Share with me. And it's not, they have to give you a breakdown of everything. Now, it depends what level in the organization. I'm going to caveat some of this. There are some roles in certain organizations that there is a level of detail or like standard operating procedures that X has to follow, by Y and Z. But if you can get curious and ask them, so, how are you going to go about this? And just listen. And then if you need to course correct in some of it, going, well, okay, but have you thought about this or you thought about that and understand the risks? And then have them say, okay, when are you going to update me next? When it's their ideas, they are more apt to A, do them and B, own them. And so when you let go of the micromanagement of it and creating an overdependent team, then you've empowered them. Then they have autonomy. It doesn't mean you have let go and abandoned them, though. You're still holding them accountable and you're there for support.
That shift from a dependable team to an independent team or like a network, right? Where you're as a manager, not the bottleneck, that makes such a big difference in what someone does day in and day out, how much they enjoy their role, the stress level that they have, and just the impact and the results that the team can create. But it requires a lot of shifting in thinking and letting go of some of that control and redefining what your role actually is as a manager. That it's not having all the ends, it's not directing the people in that level of detail to be the one who dictates where to go. And it sounds for many people like, no, I understand that I'm not that kind of leader. But then when we look at, including myself too, when we actually look at the behavior and the conversations happening day in and day out, suddenly we catch ourselves thinking like, oh, that was exactly one where I created
Mm-hmm.
now on me, where I came in thinking I'm being helpful, but I'm actually the one directing.
Yeah. Are you being helpful or are you being supportive? And we have different reasonings like, oh, I need to save them. I don't want them to get off course, or I want to help them along. And that shift from being the expert and the individual contributor into people management, your main goal now is to get work done through others. In today's work environment, you often have your own accountabilities to almost like an individual contributor. So there's rarely just a people manager these days, but your main scope is to get things done through others. That means you have to trust your team to do their work, and you have to hold them accountable to the quality level that you're being held accountable for in order for that work to actually hit the objectives of the organization. And now it gets even more complicated when you become a manager of managers. You're starting to get even more removed. So now you're doing work through people who are supposed to do work through others. And that letting go, and then how do you still know things are on track? The key here that I find with most of the organizations that I work with is that validation process for understanding expectations and creating the independent yet aligned and collaborative team versus the overdependent team that's waiting for every instruction going forward.
Yep, well said. Wrapping up, Andrea, is there anything that you feel we haven't talked about that's important to the topic?
I'm often asked, well, you know, the organization that I'm in is very micromanaging is the style, or I'm expected to do that. It all starts with you, and you can only influence and control what you do. So it's not about you managing up or managing to your peers, but how are you managing your people and how are you showing up with others? You can practice on your peers, you can, practice with others, but how you show up and what people remember about you is always in your control. You're at choice, you have agency. And so when you get real with yourself of any fears that you have, and when we're being nice, we're fearful of not being liked. When we're not telling the hard thing, we're fearful of hurting somebody's opinion of themselves and of us. And if we can address those fears and mitigate them, we can actually step into the full leadership that we can be. And it was what people will be known for, what you will be known for in the end.
Thanks for emphasizing that aspect. Andrea, thanks so much for being on, for having this conversation. I think it's one where most of us are dealing with this nice kindness, the directness, the different expectations that people have on us, or how even when we receive feedback, we might have a preference. It's not how our manager might be providing communication, such communication to us. But taking a step back and looking at how do we flex this muscle? What are the different mindset changes that create a better dynamic that allows us to create those future states that we're aiming for, and not just optimize for the current, health or well-being of the dynamics as of today or within a particular conversation. Such an important topic. So I appreciate you bringing your expertise to the Manage to Track podcast. It's great having you on. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing some feedback on the episode, and people can find me on LinkedIn or at A3 Culture Lab, and I'm happy to share more.
If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books, or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there. You can find all those links in the show notes down below.